Hi, I'm Dirk Friel, co-founder of Training Peaks, and you're listening to the Training Peaks CoachCast. My guests today on the CoachCast are Gwen Jorgensen and her coach, Bobby McGee. Gwen is a Wisconsin native and was an All-American track and cross-country runner at the University of Wisconsin. After college, USA Triathlon recruited her to the sport of triathlon, where she earned 3 podiums in her first year as a professional, earning her the title of USA Triathlon Rookie of the Year, and ultimately earned a spot to the Olympic Games in London. She became the first woman to win a world title after winning 12 straight World Triathlon Series races, followed by winning the Olympic test event and finally the gold medal in the 2016 Olympics in Rio. In 2017, Gwen announced she was retiring from triathlon to pursue a running career with the help of her longtime coach, Bobby McGee. Bobby was born in South Africa, where he started coaching middle and long-distance track runners and went on to coach road runners and marathoners. He now lives in Colorado and has decades of experience coaching elite and recreational runners and triathletes. He is best known for helping athletes find their optimal running form. He has served as USA Triathlon's development coordinator, and you can find his coaching services at bobbymcgee.com. Thanks for listening to the CoachCast. Hope you enjoy this conversation with this world-class athlete and their coach. Gwen Jorgensen, Bobby McGee, thank you so much for joining me today in this kind of winter we're seeing here in Colorado is kind of light. Been so far good for running, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course.
You're very welcome. Looking forward to it.
And I have to say, congratulations being named to the USA Triathlon Hall of Fame, Gwen. Hopefully there's a big gala for you come August, I believe, back in Milwaukee for you? Is that where that's going to be
I
held?
think it's in Milwaukee. Yes. My invite was lost in the mail. We've been traveling. We don't have a permanent address. So, but I'm very excited about that. And Milwaukee is my hometown, so it'll be fun to go back.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, here's a fun little fact you may not know about. I think when you were actually had a day job, you were working in Milwaukee, kind of on the lakefront, and our CEO, Andy Stevens, was working in the very same building as you at that time.
That's crazy. I didn't know that. That's super cool.
Yeah, definitely. So, and Bobby, tell us what you're doing these days. What's keeping you busy now?
Yeah, now I'm back to my own business, Bobby McGee Endurance Sport. I'm working with 10 athletes at the moment, and as you know, my back with the premier athlete and being Gwen. So even though it's been a rocky road, it's been really fun for me. So enjoying that, and then just working on still do a lot of support work. Of triathletes with run form and mental skills. It's almost the same thing on my own as what I was doing the previous 7 years. So
Yeah, and you
nothing has
were
really
working.
changed.
Yeah, and you were working a bunch as a director of development at USA Triathlon in the past?
Yeah, I was a performance advisor, and then I was a development coordinator, and then I was a talent identification coordinator. Yeah.
Nice, awesome. So now, Gwen, you've made the move to Colorado from Oregon, kind of switched things up a whole lot. Why come to Colorado?
Um, Patrick and I actually checked out quite a few different places of where we wanted to live, but we definitely wanted to be somewhere that was outdoor, had a lot of good running trails, good biking. And then our other requirement that kind of drew us the most to Boulder was access to family. I really want to live in Wisconsin, where my family's at, but that's just not something that benefits our lifestyle right now and not something that we want to do yet. So I needed that access to family. And so with the Denver airport, it was super easy. It was actually Bobby actually said not to move here because I knew I wanted to work with him, but he was like, you should check out other places. And I had said all along to Patrick, we don't want to make this move based on my running career. I want this to be based on our lifestyles and where we want to raise our child, Stanley. So we looked at a lot of different places, and I always said I never wanted to live in Boulder. And then we came to Boulder for like the 10th time, and we checked out parts that weren't just downtown, and I really liked it. And so we moved.
Yeah, well, you got here right before our disastrous event of the Marshall fires, unfortunately. So hopefully you weren't near those. Neither of you, hopefully.
Yeah, Bobby had to evacuate, but I'm safe in my rental. But it's just sad. We know so many people that lost their homes. Everyone does here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then the latest news from you is contracting COVID, and the whole family, it sounds like, got it. Um, that's, I mean, I haven't been through it. Bobby, have you happened to
Nope.
been
No, I've
affected?
somehow dodged it so far.
Yeah, knock on wood so far. So
Yeah.
I kind of want to dig into that. I'd love to know, like, what symptoms, how did that come along, and are you still experiencing symptoms on how many days into this are you currently?
Um, More than 10 days ago, Stanley had a fever and a cough. And I was like, this is classic COVID. We all got tested, and he, at the time, was positive, and Pat and I were negative. And looking back, we probably should have started wearing a mask in the house because Pat and I were safe at that point. But we didn't. And a couple days later, which was it was Monday, so a week ago, I started to get symptoms, and it was really bad day two. And it just seems like every day is kind of a new symptom for me. And I'm not better yet, but I'm definitely getting better.
So when you say you're not doing very well, I mean, you are just laid up in bed, sick, or on a scale of, I mean, have you been to the ER?
No, no,
How
no.
would you
I mean, I'm
describe
not.
how bad the symptoms are?
Our whole family has been fine in that regard. It's just, it's a bad flu. And, I think part of it as well is maybe we haven't been sick. None of us have been sick in 2 years. So it's a little bit of maybe a shock to the system as well. But, for me, I put it in perspective as like, I went without running for like 4 or 5 days, and I didn't even think about running. And that's something that is so unusual. Like, usually if I'm sick, I'm like begging to go outside, begging to go for a run. And that wasn't where my head was. Like, I couldn't even fathom that. So, totally fine. Didn't need to go to the ER, nothing serious, no serious complications, just extreme fatigue. Sleeping 12 hours a night plus taking 2 hour naps in the middle of the day. And, it hurts to kind of get up and walk to the bathroom. But that stuff has kind of subsided now. And now I just have mild symptoms, headache, runny nose, stomach ache. But yeah, it's interesting. Bobby actually just emailed me a COVID protocol like
Huh.
minutes before this interview, but I had a different COVID protocol, and I had been given it from a doctor who, told me this study was done back in 2020, which is so long ago now.
Yeah.
And, it was for people who had severe COVID symptoms. And just there isn't a lot of research out there on what to do. And the original one we were given, the protocol said, 10 days, no running. And this protocol that Bobby sent, kind of said, well, exercise is good. It boosts immunity. It gets blood flowing. So we're kind of at this state where we don't really know what to do. I did go for one run, it was a walk run. I did 10 minutes walking, 5-minute run 4 times, and my heart rate was through the roof. It was
Wow.
in 170s for the 5-minute runs. And so, and I was going like 8:30 pace. It's very unusual. So, yeah, we're still kind of learning through this process. And I don't think Bobby and I know what the plan is yet.
No, just because I've got another Olympic athlete in South Africa who got COVID, another Olympic athlete who's a Brazilian athlete, and she was fine and fine and fine, and then she came to Scottsdale, and now she got COVID, and the thing seems to happen with all of them. Is this massively elevated heart rate, and a lot of the research shows, but the funny thing is the resting heart rate seems okay, right? As soon as you go out there, it just goes through the roof. And to put it in perspective with Gwen, that's high tempo for her. That's like half marathon heart rate when she's jogging at 8.5 minute pace. So that really puts it in perspective for people that so easily can you do damage to your heart if you go out and you be foolish, with this kind of condition.
So with your other two athletes, have they now come out of having symptoms and they're back to
They
training, or?
Yeah, they both back to training. but
Okay.
not quality training yet.
Okay.
So the one was a while ago. She's back to pretty much quality training. The Brazilian athlete, she's swimming reasonably hard in the pool and reasonably hard on the bike, but the running still spikes it real quick. So we're taking it real easy with the running.
So it, it sounds like the symptoms kind of ramped up for you, Gwen. I mean, a new symptom every day, and almost kind of like, did you have hope at the beginning? Like, oh, this is going to be, I've heard it's no big deal. I'll be back to it. Your inner self, or you just telling yourself, I'm going to be back to it next week. I mean, what was that
Yeah.
like in the early days?
The early days, honestly, I was just worried about how I was going to take care of Stanley. If you're a parent and you have a child and you're sick and your child's sick, it's kind of all that consumes you. And so I was just worried about like, how can I take care of Stanley? Um, and it was just kind of getting through the days, and I wasn't even thinking forward. It probably wasn't until about like day 5 when Stanley started to feel better and I was able to just have more confidence that we were doing okay, that I started to think about, man, what's happening. And it's just, you said earlier, talk about like, what were the plans? Like, I wanted to do a spring marathon. There's no way that that's possible. So, that's disappointing, but it's also just, the older I get, I think the easier it is to kind of handle these things. You can see more long picture. You've been through more ups and downs, and you kind of know, like, if you push through, it's just going to cause long-term problems. And so for me, when I get in these situations, I try not to look at any calendars. I try not to look at any races, and I try to just focus on like, what do I need to do today? And that's what I've learned for me personally that can help me get through it the most.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Bobby,
remember.
have you helped the athletes?
I think COVID. They speak so much about kids internationally struggling with with mental issues, even to the point of mental illness, being isolated from friends, sort of desocializing, all this sort of things. But I think a plus of COVID is that we've become quite accepting, and I remember, when Gwen was training for triathlon, she'd get sick, and we'd basically determine, okay, would it be a good idea for her to race? And if it was okay for her to race, but she was feeling crummy, we'd go ahead and do it, because we didn't know if it was going to be she was going to be feeling crummy in Rio, and so we learned a lot from that. But now I find I'm freaking out less. If Gwen had the World Championships in Oregon and she made the U.S. marathon team, I still think we would have been reasonably chill, because what can you do? I mean, it's the whole world, and they're far more important things. And we will do the very best we can, and we'll go to the nth degree to shorten this process up. But at the same time, I think there's a broader view with athletes. There's more acceptance because there's so many of them. I mean, if you think Ben Canute and Flora and Gwen and so many of these athletes have had it, and during the season they were held up. Some kids were stuck in North Africa, some kids were stuck in Europe, other kids were stuck in Australasia, and they couldn't move, or stuck in Asia. And so I think we've it's been good for our sort of see ourselves as just part of humanity, as opposed to being singled out by illness because we push our immune system so hard.
Yeah. Well, what were the goals, like coming into this season? What were you focused on, and how do we move on from there? So let's start with that. What were you focused on accomplishing this season?
I
Well,
think it
right
was,
at the very sorry, you go,
you
Gwen.
go.
Now, right at the very beginning, when Gwen and I started, we were hoping to post a World Championship marathon qualifier, and we were doing well with that. But then the goalposts were changed for us, because suddenly the selection process went retroactive, and that window had already passed for us, and it was a very unfortunate, you know, frustrating period of time. And then we'd go, okay, well, now we're just going to try and get to a point where we can run a fast marathon. And in that lead up, the goal was to run an opening half marathon, put down a good mark, and then work towards a really fast half marathon in the build up to that marathon. That was basically, we didn't make it super long term.
So
Yep.
when was this peak marathon going to be?
Well, that was another issue. I really wanted to do one in March, and with COVID, there wasn't many March options. Going abroad was difficult. It was hard to get into races because of COVID, and then you were uncertain. Um, so we didn't even, I really wanted to do a March marathon, and Bobby and I talked about this at length, and he wanted to wait a little bit longer for a marathon that was more conducive. Just, we couldn't really find a March marathon that wasn't, it was either really hot or, just uncontrollables that we couldn't control. So he wanted something that was more reliable or had a better chance of me running a fast marathon. So we hadn't even picked one. We were still kind of on the search.
We were getting international race coordinators saying to us, we'll let you know X. And X was like 4 or 5 weeks before go time. And in marathon running, you can't hear 4 or 5 weeks before the race whether you're going to make it or not. The other thing, too, was with COVID and everything else, and Gwen's foray into track work, we had an aging out marathon PR that wasn't very strong anyway. So you didn't have a lot of negotiation power on your side. So
Right.
we had to use the fact that Gwen's a good racer, the fact that Gwen's an Olympic gold medalist, the fact that we had to rely on those things. And truly locally there just wasn't anything that suited that. We're even looking at running sort of a time trial marathon that would create an effective time. But Gwen and I soon realized that, the level of motivation and the need for pacing and all that sort of stuff was going to be, a too high a hill to climb, and it was
Right.
just, you'd waste all this time on a 20% chance you were going to get what you wanted.
Right. With all your recent track training and racing and peaks, were you feeling that had a benefit to your road racing marathon fitness? Was that like an overall strategy for you too? Like, let's gain this speed work and bring it. It's almost like bring it from the Olympic level triathlon to the long course triathlon, and you see that often and you have that speed behind you. Were you seeing that benefit from the track?
I think, that's a lot of people, before you become a marathoner, you have to become a good 10Ker. And, there's all these things. And, obviously speed will help, but I'm going to let Bobby answer that more because he's the coaching expert.
Yeah, I think it's quite common. It's been that way for many years that, that a prerequisite for a good marathon is a good 10K. And I think the frustrating part is that the whole process started with the marathon for Gwen, when after she'd left triathlon. And
Right.
then due to the timing of the Olympic trials and stuff like that, and the injury to the heel, that fell by the wayside. And the logical next option was to give the 10K a go, and then just mistimings, occurrences, um, issues with altitude, return rates, all that sort of thing. Suddenly now the 10K, although Gwen had qualified, for the 10,000 meters, she hadn't qualified in that new IAAF ruling that you also had to run an Olympic qualifier, which was considerably faster than a US qualifier. And then because the 10,000 was so strong in the country, we had the situation where the 10,000 was going to be two races. And then we ended up with the trials being record high temperatures, and at 10,000 meters for anybody to qualify in was not going to happen. And then Gwen ran that awesome 5K and got the Olympic standard for the 5K, which was basically her third event at that point in time. And that was actually a very successful campaign for Gwen with Coach Jerry, where she made it into the final at the 5,000 meter trials in her C event, which was fantastic. But I still sit here, and Gwen and I talk about this sometimes. I still sit here and I know Gwen is better than 31:30 for 10K. She just hasn't run it. And I think that Gwen definitely has the ability to go sub 15 for 5K, and we haven't had that opportunity either. But the marathon makes sense in terms of Gwen's physiology as well, and her ability to sit on these very high level paces for long periods of time.
Yeah. So let's go into, again, pre-COVID, your typical training that you were doing. You didn't have a race date out there. So how do you deal with that, both as a coach and athlete? Um, no clear a race date. That's so unusual in your couple decades of training as an elite athlete. So how do you manage that fitness? Are you trying to keep it at 80%, and then once we know a date, we can then nail that peak? Or are you backing off a bunch of systems and working on one weakness and let the others kind of deteriorate until you know some goal? I mean, how do you play that out?
I mean, Bobby, I can let you answer more, but I think in my head I was still hopeful that one of those March marathons, I'd get a notice 4 weeks out, and we'd do that. And so that's kind of in my head what I was kind of training for. I was still hopeful that something would come through in March. But Bobby, you can kind of talk about how I was training during that time.
Yeah. So we actually, if you think about the marathon, elite athletes that are coming to the marathon for the first time can often fall prey to this all the eggs in one basket with the marathon, because the marathon requires such a singular focus. But the truth be told, we had two, half marathons spread apart, which were basically a half marathons for us. And then, reasonably late stage, we picked the 5K nationals, where Gwen went really well, and she went right according to expectation in terms of where her training was at that time. But we were always looking at the American half marathon champs as, as that, a race. But then we also had, and as it turned out, it was a complete barnstormer. We were worried that the half marathon in with Houston was going to be too hot, and it turned out to be the perfect day. And we got American record in the half,
Right,
and we got American
Sarah
record
Hall,
in the
right?
marathon. It was just crazy. But anyway, so that the focus was always going to be that.
Yeah.
And you always have a half marathon, 5 4 weeks before a marathon anyway. And we didn't really have to think marathon, other than these big workouts would have happened 2 weeks before this half marathon, and for the 3 or 4 weeks after this half marathon anyway. So we weren't lost. We were more dealing with circumstances.
All
We
right. So you
we
had a
weren't
window you were
aimless.
playing with.
Yeah, yeah. We
So
weren't trying to
mentally
get into
you were focused on this window, it sounds like.
yes, exactly. And we, so the workouts were always going to be developmental. We were always, working. We'd gone through an entire phase of threshold work, and she was going really, really well. And then we had that mishap where the build race, the half marathon, was freakishly hot, and we had done no preparation for a hot race in Boulder at that period of time. It didn't even occur to us that that would be so hot. And a lot of the athletes said, "Wow, that was amazing. It was so uncharacteristically hot."
Yeah. Have you found groups to train with, or do you leverage groups within your training? Maybe how often, how many days a week were you leveraging a group run?
I would run. I had Evan Schwartz who would run with me on my hard workouts, which was just amazing to have him. He was kind of a perfect pacer for me. And then on my easy days, I really found just people in town to run with. I felt like there were so many people here that I knew or had connections with, made some new friends, and I've really Patrick's definitely more social than me, and he was kind of making fun of me the other day because he's like, "You have more friends than me," because I did. I seemed to instantly come here and have people to run with on my easy days, which was pretty awesome.
Nice. Uh,
Gwen
this-
would literally meet athletes, international athletes or national class athletes out on a run, and they join up, and then they make an arrangement for the weekend. So Gwen just does this, and she'll have 5 training partners in a heartbeat for a long run on a weekend.
Yeah, I love that around here. I went for a ride the other day and it was like Emma Coburn and her training group, and go up on Magnolia Road and see all the folks running up there.
So many people.
Yeah, and then yeah, so the dirt. Talk to me about surfaces. Do you specifically, target days where is there benefit to running on the dirt? Do you focus on that? Do you run all the ways on the road? How does that play into your strategy of training?
I love asphalt, but Bobby pushes me to run on dirt more. So, Bobby, you can kind of explain that.
You know, at my stage in my coaching career, I'm really working hard at listening to the athletes more and more, right? I've never been a dogmatic coach. And if you look at, the issues that Gwen has, and you look at her mechanics, et cetera, and the feedback is always, I have less discomfort when I run on the asphalt. And, then you go with that. Then I say, okay, well, let's go asphalt and just not concrete. But my general feeling is if we're going to do something really, really fast, then I don't mind the asphalt, and I don't mind the track, right? But if we're going to do something intermediate, and up in Boulder with the altitude, even though it's intermediate altitude, to develop leg speed, sometimes it's a good idea, if you're not going to use supplemental oxygen, to do downhill work, which Gwen hated, but it served her really well. And so we would try and find a surface, and I'd literally be on the bike and I'd say, okay, this surface for the next 200 meters is fine. And then I'm screaming at Gwen to just come a little bit more to the center, because it's starting to get bumpy on the outside. Because when it gets uneven is when she has discomfort. And so, you know, I'm not torn about it, and I understand why it works for her on the asphalt. I worry a little bit about camber and stuff like that, but there are dirt routes that serve her well, especially at the intermediate paces.
So, Bobby, you mentioned mechanics. Gwen, obviously, a very fast runner. Does she need to work on mechanics, or is that a daily, weekly? If she does, how do you even work that into, an elite athlete like Gwen in terms of working on her form and mechanics?
Yeah, very interesting. So Gwen and I have been working on her mechanics much, much longer than I've been coaching Gwen as her primary coach. I've always been privileged, when Gwen had her triathlon coaches and her primary triathlon coach, and then when she had her primary distance running coach, that they all felt comfortable that I would be involved with Gwen's mechanics. And I'm always looking for a way to add some mechanical efficiency. And it's not like a skills thing. So with Gwen, I'm not trying to make these rote changes.
Yeah.
I'm letting her know what I'm noticing, and then I'm letting her know why, if we could address that, we could get a little bit better function, and we would get a little bit more durability, and we could get some more duration, we could get some more consistency, and even get some more speed.
Do
All
you
right. So
overemphasize anything in particular?
anything in particular? Yeah, so that's why I was so excited before we started the interview. I was telling you about that connection between what the body is capable of doing in terms of movement and range of motion, and what the mechanics coach is looking for it to do. And there's the balance, there's the range of motion, and there's the skills component, right? Which sounds funny with running, because in running you don't say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to run today, right? But all of the dynamic mobility drills and the run drills are diagnostic as well. And then you notice anomalies and you address those anomalies specifically. So one of Gwen's anomalies is that one of her arms, her left arm, she ends up swinging her arm backwards, and her hand goes outside of her elbow if you were viewing her from the front. All right. And so that causes her to come upright a little bit, and it also causes a little bit of a shortness of that stride length. And so you go, why is Gwen doing that? And we know she gets nice and tight in the thoracic spine. And as a result, she's habituated this little arm swing that pulls her offline and pulls her upright. And so those are easy things to do in combination with the strength coach and specific drills. That's one example. The other example is Gwen has this condition in her heels, that we don't want to put a lot of torque on her soleus and on her Achilles tendon, right? So we work to make sure things are linear there and that there's not too much twisting. But you also need a certain amount, for example, of pronation. So one of the things we were playing with recently was we felt in certain shoes she was pronating too much, but in other shoes they were overcorrecting and they weren't giving us enough. And so you go, you in the strength and conditioning component, you address that instability in the ankle, but in the footwear drills component, you're trying to get that happy medium. It's really, really fun, especially when the athlete starts to buy in and plays along. So when Gwen looks at a video of herself and she says, wow, that looks good now, and I get that she's now got the distinction, that's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And so when we contacted physical therapists and her previous teams and we showed them the video, they said, wow, you really cleaned that up. That looks fantastic. And that's very, very gratifying, when that happens.
Gwen, do you have self talk? What do you say to yourself in terms of like when you think form, what type of things are you thinking of, internally to
Yeah,
stay?
with form, I think Bobby can attest to this, but I have like no shame. So like when I do something poorly, I'm fine with it, and I'm like, okay, well, teach me how to do it better. And I think one of the biggest things for me, Bobby kind of mentioned it, but with my arm, like it started from like a tight T spine, and my T spine is still habitually tight. But even when my T spine gives me rotation, I still have the arm swing because it's a habit. And so, there was a big breakthrough for me, when Bobby was showing me like, no, you can get in the range. It's just that now you've habituated this. And so you don't because it's a habit. And so it's fun to learn things like that. And something that I've really just enjoyed working with Bobby is it's just fun because I feel like I'm learning something every day, and I feel like I'm so green in this sport still, and there's so much knowledge still that I can absorb, and that's something that's really exciting for me. And like Bobby said as well, we sent a video to some of my old PTs in Portland, and people that looked after me, and they're like, "What are you doing? You look amazing!" And so it's really gratifying when you work on these little things every day, and you don't necessarily see the changes, but then you see this big change all of a sudden, and it's just really it shows you that the little things in the mechanics do pay off.
Yeah. So, Bobby, I'm certainly no good runner, but I dabble in running. I'm more of a cyclist. So, what are the typical things that you see within the amateur ranks or age groupers? What are the kind of two or three biggest tips that you find yourself always kind of dishing out?
Yeah, I wouldn't really call them tips. I would call them major points.
Okay.
And just to the previous point, I just wanted to go through one of the big rocks in the box that makes Gwen a champion. Her whole life is exactly what she spoke about. She doesn't get confronted. She doesn't get frustrated. She sees everything as an opportunity, and she really wants to get in there. She wants to get in there almost more than the coaches and the support team. So no, I want to master that. What's going on here?
Yeah, you
Anyway, I just
mentioned
wanted to
you
mention that.
talk a lot about vulnerability,
Yep,
vulnerability almost equaling opportunity, right? And allowing
yep.
yourself to be vulnerable, which is you're just mentioning she can be fine with that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the mental skills that Gwen and I have been working on recently is for her to be more forgiving of herself. That she
Yeah.
doesn't get frustrated when she cannot do things. She doesn't quit, but she also has the distinction that so many athletes have, that it's either bad and wrong or it's good and right. And just to take out the wrong and the right and just say that's correct and that's incorrect and it's fine.
Right. You're giving it
So
meaning. You might be giving it more meaning than it's worthy of.
exactly right, exactly right. And
So back
that
so back
that
to me being a horrible runner, what are the rocks I should think about?
that's exactly the word she uses. She'll do something and she'll say that was horrible, and I'm going, no, it was just less effective than it has been, or that it can be. Anyway, so to get back to the big points with mechanics, I think I came up with a thing years ago called the 3 C's, right? Which is compact, connected, and cadence, right? And the compact thing is that many average runners they try and get too much out of their gait, and then they end up slamming on the brakes with every foot strike. All right, and they overwork areas instead of settling into what their engine is producing and matching that up perfectly. And then the cadence thing is, generally speaking, although cadence is attached to pace, when you go fast, your cadence is higher. When you go slow, your cadence is lower. But generally, you'll get people who come from a background of rewarding effort. Like it's like in golf, right? The harder you try, the worse you are. And that happens very much in running. People try and muscle the run. They think it's about pushing themselves forward. They think it's about bearing down and that kind of thing. And it's not. It's about trying to find that sweet spot of elastic return. And then the connected one comes up all the time, especially in that triathlon community where the athlete loses the chest. The chest goes up, the center of mass goes back. They get all rigged up in their low back, and then they lose the cadence, they lose the momentum, and they lose that dynamic balance. They go into a more static plane, and they can't move forward. And that's a really subtle process. And Gwen can speak to that whole concept of getting your rib cage to internally rotate, still staying tall, but being rigid in a slightly forward posture. And we work on that with Gwen every single day.
Is that the falling forward kind of concept Gwen, do you
Yeah,
think
but
about
everything
that?
that goes with that, right?
Yeah.
So the falling forward, but not leaving the legs behind. There's that whole setting of the knees in an appropriate angle so that when you fall forward, you're not bringing the foot in from the back, you're bringing the foot down from the front. You
Yeah.
got that gathering motion going on instead of slamming on the brakes. Because a lot of people, then they hear lean's great and then they go impossible. They lean far too much and become incredibly uneconomical, and they slamming on the brakes with every time they bring the foot into the ground.
Huh. So how does this compare to swim form work, Gwen?
It's so different because I think in swimming it's so technique based, and in running I feel like it's more these, Bobby touched on this, like you don't teach somebody how to run. It's more these broad concepts, and more learning how to kind of, what should my posture be is more what it's about versus, like Bobby said, like if you think about running too much, it almost hurts you. So, um, yeah, swimming technique, I feel like you can do drills and drills and drills and drills. And in running, we do drills a couple times a week, but it's mostly about, those drills are kind of what set your body up so that you're ready to run.
Yeah. And Bobby, for more age groupers, do you see times when an athlete should just stop the workout because the fatigue is built up too much, they're doing bad, the form is way off, or are there tips whereby you'll say, okay, I want you to do this until you can't perform some certain aspect of the form, it's just,
Yeah,
it's not worth going on. Can you dig into any of that?
yeah, you definitely can, right? It's very prevalent in swimming, right? You get to a point in swimming, especially for beginner triathletes that are adult onset swimmers. You know what I'm saying? Where they can work really, really hard, but they're working right out of zone and they're not moving at all, but they're just thrashing away there. With running, it's not quite like that because it's a much more natural movement. But what happens is they start to break.
Yeah.
And the consequence in running of pushing through is structural damage, right? You can get stress fractures and stuff like that. So you see this so often illustrated when swimmers come to the sport of triathlon, right? They are instant stress fractures looking for a place to happen just because they have this big motor that they've strapped to a toilet door, right? They just don't have the structural integrity and that sense of running is not this powerful movement. It's getting yourself into the right posture so that when you load that connective tissue, which is goes awry in the pool as well, especially around the ankles, and then they start using this big engine to force themselves, and then they just fail in the legs or in the feet.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there is a good model for that, where you run effectively for a short period of time, and then you take a little reset, take a little walk break, and then run again. That works very, very effectively. And then there's also the other concept is you run only as long as you're maintaining your form, but that requires a great deal of proprioceptive awareness, right?
right.
Where runners, I always say there's not enough resistance in running, because A, we run too slowly, and B, we run in a medium that is too light for us to get feedback, right? When you go on the bike, you're going fast enough to feel you're not aero, right? You can literally feel, when the wind comes up, boom, you slow down. Or when you're trying to pick up speed and you're using endless watts and you only picked up a half a mile an hour.
Yeah.
All right. But in running, all you do is you straighten up and you say, I'm tired. You don't realize that you've lost your form. You don't realize that you picked up your shoulders. You don't realize that your head's gone up. You don't realize that you've dropped your hands. You don't realize that you've lost your rhythm and your cadence is gone.
Yeah.
You just slog on until, until the workout becomes ineffectual.
Yeah. I kind of, I did a funny week a couple weeks ago where I wanted to ramp up my running. And so I did 50 1-mile repeats. So each day I did 7 miles, but I
Yep.
did a 1-minute walk after every
Yep.
single mile. So for that
Oh,
entire
I see
week,
what you're saying.
I did 50, like 8:30 pace miles, followed by a 1-minute walk, just to gather myself, bring the heart rate back down. And I did that the entire week, 7 miles a day for 7 days. And I just I don't know. I went into that week saying, I got to keep my form, I don't want to, but I want to hit 50 miles, so
Yep.
that
Now
was
do that for the next 6 weeks. Then you
okay.
will see magic start to happen, right?
All right.
Because Gwen and I both heard I did 50 by 1 mile with a minute
Yeah.
walk. And we went, that is impressive.
Yeah.
It's a
But it took
lot.
me a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's fine. No, and
Awesome.
you'll be surprised, right? So that felt good. You recovered from that. You felt you were mastering 8:30 pace, and now you go next week. Oh, now I'm just going to run seven miles at a time without that walk break, and then suddenly you're just going to get stuck again. Persist with that.
Yeah.
Take
Yeah.
those 1 mile on, 1 minute walk, and over time you'll see those 1 mile ons come up,
Yeah.
and then you can go, all right, now I'm going to try a 5 miler and see how it goes. And you will see that you're doing plenty of development work that way, that you're improving your continuous running, and that you might ultimately, if you do compete with that run, probably find once you're going more than 45 minutes to an hour, you'll probably find you're going to go faster. And I see this all the time, right? I see this every 12 weeks from individuals that I work with, right? That running an hour continuously, they get further if they run like 9-1 for an hour. They get more distance. And
Yeah.
that's the critical piece, right? You're trying to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Nobody's asking you how much of that time you spent walking.
Yeah. Exactly. Sounds like my Iron Man.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, thanks so much. And Gwen, hopefully you are on the backside of this COVID and the whole family is getting better. I hope there's not a new symptom
Yes.
every single day. I don't want to hear that, but
Well, the
yeah,
symptoms
good luck.
are, yeah, we're getting much better. Yes. And I don't want
Super.
any sympathy from people. We are doing just fine. It's just, it's a
Well, it'll
sickness.
be,
And you just have to, take our time. And I think it is a good time to just listen to the body. And as athletes, I feel like we know our bodies and just kind of have to, like we said before, there's not a ton of knowledge out there. So just kind of listen to the body and do what it can.
yeah, you just have to sit back and let it dictate every day
Yep.
going forward right now. So you got a good man there helping you out. You got a couple of good men there helping you out. And
Yep.
so I appreciate the discussion. Thank you so much. And yeah, Bobby, I need to come see you sometime for some form critique. So that would be fun.
You'd be welcome.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.